Hey, this is Eric from the DTC Podcast. And just before we get into today's podcast with Sarah Carusona, fractional CMO of Alpha Lion, I want to announce that September 18th and 19th in Victoria, British Columbia, we're putting on our third epic Mastermind event. It's called C-Suite Mastermind, Apex Operators, and it's for the people in our audience that are looking to transcend where they are in their business or their career right now and get to that next level, whether it's 7 to 8 figures, 8 to 9 figures, or beyond. We're bringing in mentors who've operated at the highest scales, including Sarah Carusona, who's going to be joining us as a mentor in Victoria on September 18th to 19th. So every time we put on one of these events, the podcast makes up a huge percentage of the attendees who end up coming out. So I really hope we can pull in some amazing podcast listeners into these in-depth conversations we're going to do at C-Suite, along with lots of learning, lots of networking, and lots of sort of extracurricular fun stuff where we're going to go do some fun things that get everyone a little outside of their comfort zone and really help the learnings and the connections sink in, and all in our beautiful backyard here in Victoria, British Columbia. I cannot wait. This podcast is an absolute masterclass on omni-channel marketing mindset. You're really going to hear Sarah dive into how she thinks about managing massive budgets at scale. And I think that's the reason why I thought she would be such a good fit to join the proceedings at C-Suite. So if you are interested in joining us at C-Suite, you got to apply. It's brands only, but you can go to events.directtoconsumer.co and check it out. I think it's probably the nicest landing page I've ever built. So shout out to Pau, my designer, on that one. Thanks so much, guys. I hope to see some of you at C-Suite, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about it in the coming weeks through the podcast. But for now, enjoy Sarah Carusona and on with the show.
The one sentence goal of brand spend is you want to spend just enough to service the customers that are coming there. I would equate it to if I owned a restaurant, for example. I want just enough servers in the restaurant to service the amount of people who are coming in. So if I've got 50 people there and 2 servers, I did not do well. If I've got 2 people when I've got 50 servers, I also didn't do well. There's a few tools out there. They'll basically suppress your brand spend if you're already going to show up, number one, organically. And there's some interesting plays there depending on how omni-channel your brand is. So if, for example, you don't care if people search on Amazon versus Google, you could say, hey, if Amazon's going to show up first, that's fine. We're going to save the money on it. So there's some kind of interesting strategies that you could explore depending on your business.
Content from real people equals instant credibility for your brand. Consumers today crave real connections with real people, and they're guarded about who they'll trust. Highly polished, branded content simply doesn't cut it anymore. Let Mini-Social build a network of powerful micro-influencers around your brand who all know and love your products. They'll create something compelling that resonates with their audience and deliver it directly to you for use across all your marketing channels. Yeah, that includes ads. Meet millennials and Gen Zers where they're already hanging out, in the feeds of their favorite influencers, and get started with Mini-Social. Sarah, welcome to the DTC Podcast. You're in the midst of a Twitter glow up. I saw recently, what is he, the Elon of DTC. Sean Frank recently tweeted you out as a great person he's tried to work with in the past. I saw one of your posts recently talking about your recent kind of moving on from OluKai, which is a brand that I've been following for a while. So it's nice to have you on the podcast. Eager to hear kind of what's next for you and your perspective on the space. How you doing?
I'm good, Eric. Thank you so much for having me. I've been a longtime subscriber. I can't tell you the number of times that my team would forward your newsletter to each other and talk about different things that we should be trying at OluKai. So really honored to be on. But yeah, Sean did try to hire me a while back, and we've been kind of in touch ever since. And he definitely helped me with my follower count. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, where I'm at right now. So I left OluKai a little over a month ago and decided to kind of go off on my own. My husband and I are actually planning to move out of the country. And so we're looking to go to Buenos Aires at the end of October and live out of the country at least for a year. So decided to go off on my own as a kind of fractional CMO head of growth. And I actually just accepted a role as a fractional head of growth at a supplement brand called Alpha Lion. They are,
Nice.
kind of lifestyle, sports nutrition. I worked with them when I was at CTC. Jordan Ferris, who's the CEO, is just a really high quality guy. He also has tried to poach me a couple times, and I've turned him down a couple times, but finally kind of made sense for the both of us. And just, it's a really exciting time for their brand. They're close to 9 figures, and they've got this kind of sub brand that they're spinning off called Superhuman, which is kind of energy platform for energy, morning, afternoon, and night. And so I'm just really excited to be a part of that growth.
What a cool opportunity. And that's right out of Sean. I think Sean Frank was just commenting on his perspective on the business after reviewing like 50 different companies. And he was saying that supplements are one of the industries he's seeing that aren't as down as maybe some other ones in the D2C world. And really, it's like when you're selling supplements, it's pretty commodified. So it's all a lot of it is marketing, right? A lot of it is where marketing does the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Supplements is an interesting space. It's honestly one that I've been wary of in some regards because I've seen it go well and I've seen it go really, really not well. But I think that if you do it right and you're not scammy, you're not spammy, you actually have great ingredients and you can become kind of a part of the person's life. It's a really fun space to be in. And I think something like Alpha Lion, where it's very content driven and you can have a lot of fun with that. And there's, room to kind of play and get into like the humor space and whatnot, and influencers and creators. So I just think that there's a lot of opportunity in that regards.
I was just discussing that with someone I met at the dog park, actually, about how, every company, it kind of behooves them at this point to think about themselves a little bit like a media company as well when it comes to their audience, right? If you're an e-commerce company, you want to be able to have that sort of media aspect where you're engaging people on all these other aspects of their lives that may be just sort of secondarily related to your product, but you can kind of bring your product into to help make it part of their ritual.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that investing in content is the first thing that I would do if I were to start a brand, because it's a way to build brand. And I think it is kind of the new way to build brand. Now, that being said, I think that you want to develop content that is tangential and or closely related to your product and people walk away remembering what your product is. I think it was, I'm blanking on his name, but one of the old co-founders of Chubbies, I think, posted about this once, about how they created a lot of viral content and they got really good at going viral, but they were realizing that it wasn't actually eventually leading to sales. And what you want is that virality, but you also want that to be people walk away remembering your product and ideally also wanting to buy it at some point in the near future.
That's funny. I think I remember reading about Chubbies early on and how much they invested in comedy, like invested in writers and in their content. And I don't think I had heard the other side of that loop, which was they took it too far away from the product and actually found that it wasn't driving sales. I thought that was really interesting. What I think about is a conversation I had with Rick Cadotte from Four Sigmatic recently, talking about going in deep up funnel with his content for mushroom coffee, talking about the individual ingredients of the coffee. And so that people looking for ashwagandha or specific kinds of non-fruiting bodies or would find them and then kind of be led down the rabbit trail. So I think that's one really great strategy, is kind of going up funnel in terms of your product, how it's made, the people, all that kind of thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The problem that you're trying to solve, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think for them too, what he was posting about was that there needed to be some kind of metric, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the way that I interpreted it was there needed to be some kind of metric that they could be able to measure the actual revenue impact. So whether that was, people actually following their accounts or, searching for them organically or, things of that nature, that actually they could measure against a revenue increase.
So your time at OluKai, you're managing large marketing budgets, a very fast growing startup, very, it was a startup appreciating maturity there. What was that experience like? Talk a little bit about how it started and where you finished when you were at the end.
Yeah, sure. So OluKai is an interesting one. They've actually been around for over 15 years, and they, were more wholesale up until, about like 2019, 2020. And I had OluKai actually as my client when I was at CTC. And so I started with them in 2021, and I got to experience an epic second half of the year with them and a crazy Q4 where we just blasted past expectations. They were, big into the slipper category, and that was just COVID was still, pretty prominent, and people were still, working from home and staying at home. And it was perfect timing, and it was wonderful. And then I had a little bit of a roundabout way of ending up working internally. I got poached to go to a CPG brand that 7 weeks later, they decided to go more wholesale versus D2C, and made a little switcheroo on the growth team, which was unfortunate, but kind of fortunate for me, because then I, got a call from OluKai and ended up going over there. So I was internal at OluKai for about 2 years. I managed everything from, a pretty massive media budget that spanned across traditional and digital channels. So everything from your Meta and Google, TikTok, YouTube, to direct mail, to linear and streaming TV. Oversaw the budget for influencers and UGC, out of home. I mean, really kind of the whole gamut. And they operated in a way where all budget was considered. There wasn't kind of like a separated brand budget, so to speak. So that was the media side. I also oversaw the website, CRO, and merchandising. I oversaw the business intelligence, so building out their kind of reporting warehouse and Tableau. That was actually then used across all of the brands. There's 4 brands that are kind of owned under the same holding company. So Melon, the premium hat company, Rourke, which is an apparel company, and Kanan, which is a premium eyewear or sunglass company. So I did all the reporting. And then what am I missing? Oh, retention. So I oversaw the loyalty program and then own channels. And I actually oversaw inventory management for the first year that I was there. But then that got moved into kind of its own function, which was something I was grateful for.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a pretty sprawling role. One of the things I'm really interested, we're always talking about omni-channel marketing with the brands that come on the podcast, and that sounds about as omni-channel as you can get. We actually have someone coming up, and I forget, I'm blanking on who it is right now, but we're doing a summer writers series, and someone's writing about it's Spencer Toomey from Built is going to be writing about how to do omni-channel wrong and sort of some of the big mistakes they made when integrating a bunch of these other channels out of home TV, things like that, when it came to how they measured it and how they did their budgeting. What are some of your learnings in either mistakes you made with omni-channel or some of the wins?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny, I think the new VP of ecom at OluKai also came from Built, Ben something, I'm blanking on his last name, but it's a great question. I think that developing a model I'm very passionate about having a mathematical model that leads to your overall business goals. And at the end of the day, when you're running a business, you're making decisions based on data, but a lot of it's based on gut or bets. It's kind of like being at the casino. You can't know everything. And so what I just always try to do is have some kind of model that I could go back to and say, this is the reason why I'm making this decision. This is the reason why we are making this decision. This is how we're going to measure it. And did it work or did it not? And how do we learn? So just really trying to take a scientific approach. And so for the omni-channel mix, I posted about this a while ago, and I won't go into huge details on it, but I basically developed a model where we can measure both last click orders from paid online channels as well as kind of our offline organic orders, and how the mixture of all of them led up into your overall new order count as well as CAC and ACoS. And the way that I did it is you have kind of 3 main metrics that you're measuring on a daily basis. You're measuring your last click CPA kind of blended between, your Meta, your Googles, your TikToks, whatever it is. You've got your percentage of orders from those channels that are new. And then you've got this organic ratio, which is basically for every paid order, how many offline organic orders are you getting? And there's no right or wrong to any of these metrics, which I think is where some people can get tripped up. It's not that a high last click CPA is wrong and a low last click CPA is good, or a high organic ratio is good and a low one's bad. It's how they work together to lead to your overall CAC and ACoS goals. And if you're able to contextualize that and understand it, it became a great operating tool to be able to give my channel managers' targets and then measure against them on a monthly, weekly basis. And then me, as the overall operator, I was in charge of then being able to say, like, hey, if I actually see that our CAC and our ACOS are right where I want it, and Facebook, I know your CPA is higher than what I told you, but guess what? I don't care. That's your new target. Go keep spending. And so that then was the kind of the relationship and the way that we built that out. And I think for the offline side of things, and by offline, I mean media that does not have a last click trackable UTM. So everything from, I would include influencers in here unless you're using UTMs, but even if you're using UTMs, it's a lot, most people use promo codes or something. But also obviously TV, direct mail, some affiliate can be in here too. And then obviously like any kind of out of home advertising. But the way that I would look at those media channels is one, whatever the platform agency buyer was telling me, and then obviously digging into their attribution windows and asking all of those diligent questions. But then two, if you're interacting with some kind of offline media, the first thing that you're doing as a consumer is you're typing into your search bar that brand. You're either going directly to their site or you're searching for it. And then if you search for it, you're going to either click on a paid ad or a organic ad. And so if you combine your direct and search traffic and kind of look at that as like a channel grouping, I would measure that over time and measure how it was growing or decreasing, and then how that's growing or decreasing with the percentage or amount of spend that I was putting on offline channels. And a big red flag is if I'm spending more on TV and my direct and search traffic is down and there's a significance delta between those two things, then I know there's something wrong there. The only caveat to that, though, as well, that I would add in for any brand or media operator is finding ways to add in Amazon to that, because that's the only other place that people are possibly going to search for you.
Are you using then post-purchase surveys as sort of like a sanity check as well to check on this media mix, or
yeah.
How do you use post-purchase surveys in this mix?
Yeah, that's a great question. So post-purchase survey was something that I would look at probably at least monthly, sometimes weekly, but honestly, it's not something that I was looking at daily. And yes, it was more of a sanity check in terms of, okay, we start a new channel. One, what's the channel telling us? Two, what's our overall traffic, et cetera, telling us? Three, what's post-purchase telling us? And so if all three of those are bad, which I had experiences where I would test different, usually it was display, honestly. I tested a couple of different kind of display channels or agencies to work with. And I would see almost zero post-purchase survey data come through. I would see great results as reported on platform. But then when I looked at the traffic that was coming, it was super low quality, high bounce rate. They weren't purchasing at all. And so those things, when you combine them together, you can kind of say, okay, this is either working or not working. And then the opposite would happen, where maybe we'd put YouTube is a good example, put a small amount of budget on YouTube, and all of a sudden I saw YouTube pop like I'd never seen it before. I was like, okay, that makes sense. So something's happening here, because I think the thing that post-purchase survey data tells you, which I think is very powerful, is it's not telling you the last click story, right? Because the last click story, we all know what that is. It's the last place somebody touched. But what the post-purchase survey data is telling you is where people remembered you and where what comes to mind for them about you as a brand, whether or not they saw you 15 other times on Meta and then got 5 other emails. Maybe it was the one YouTube video they saw is where it hit home for them.
Because you're looking to check, whether, how actually incremental each of these channels are, but then you're also looking for the positive impact, the halo effect, right? That might happen with some of these channels like podcasts or out of home, might happen in a more delayed fashion a little bit. And I guess That's really where you're looking for that search bar. Anything that's outside the internet, you're really looking for the spike in search terms for that. That makes sense.
Totally. And I think something like an MMM solution would be great to layer on top of that. And it was something I was looking towards doing in the future, because I do think that MMM is a way for you to get a little bit more of that data. Again, you have to use it directionally, and you have to use it in the context of the time it's being measured and the time that you're forecasting it out towards, and what's the difference in the future that you might have, different products, different, media mix, whatever it is. But I do think that that's another data point that could be really helpful in those situations.
One of the situations you mentioned in the pre-interview was one of the challenges that had upside at OluKai was the fact that it was not a discount brand, and that so many brands in our space get addicted to discount in exchange for email. Talk about that situation and how you turned it into an upside.
Yeah, I actually think that OluKai holding their stance on not discounting is really admirable. And it was one of those things that when you would talk with different agencies and whatnot, they would always bring up discounting like a couple times. Like whenever I would work with a new agency, a new partner, a new external partner, there would always be like one or two times where they'd be like, but what about like if you just offered 5% off? And I always had to do like the discount slap down, just be like, just don't talk about it again. It's not happening. And
Slap down,
and
nice.
Yeah, just like slap it down. And because it does become really, really challenging. And I think the most challenging place is email capture, because that's the most common ways that you get emails. And so I think that one of the kind of levers that we started to play with was around free shipping and offering kind of promo codes for free shipping. And I think that that was really, really helpful for us. I would say that the benefit of not discounting is the premium nature of the product. You are standing behind the product that you have created and the price that you are holding it to. And you are saying,
the brand.
This is the brand itself. Yeah. And I think that there's a drug effect to discounting that is so true. And I see it all the time. And when I was at Common Thread, it was just, it's constant and you kind of become immune to it. And there's, at the extreme end, there's Bed Bath & Beyond example. And then at the other extreme end, there's, the Olokai example where we're not discounting at all. The exact right mix is hard to say. I think that there are some brands that I admire that I think do it really well. Like Lilly Pulitzer is one that I am a consumer of, and they do, two, kind of biannual sales like a lot of companies do. But it's like 2 days only. They actually had me sign in to be able to even get to the sale, which some people could say is a good or a bad thing. But I think that the way that they did it was, you've got to really be wanting this to be going through the sale process. And we're being really clear that this is basically the stuff we actually made too much of. But you do get a lower quality consumer. And myself for Lilly Pulitzer, I've probably bought like 2 things full price, but otherwise I'm definitely the one that's waiting for that sale, period.
You train your customers, right? You train and select your customers that way. Do you know what the policy is going to be at the supplement brand?
Definitely they do discounts. Yeah. So different kinds of offers for first-time customers, bundles, all those things, gift with purchase. So it's going to be really fun there because I think that part of what I'm going to be digging into is kind of what that first-time offer is. And it's really, I was actually talking with the CEO back and forth about kind of how to measure the success of different funnels. And do you measure it by the first time AOV to CAC ratio? Do you measure it by the 3-month LTV to CAC ratio? Do you measure it by the 12-month LTV to CAC ratio? All of the above. And it's an interesting one. And then would you accept a lower or basically, how negative of a first time order margin are you willing to take if you're able to make your money back at tenfold within 3 months? And the balance of all of that.
What length of window are you willing to swallow it?
Yeah, exactly. And is it actually worth it to swallow it? Does this offer actually get them back faster or to spend more versus a different offer? And it's going to be such an interesting balance. But those are the type of kind of problems that I love to solve and kind of science experiments that I like to dig into because at the end of the day, it's data and then it's making a bet, testing it and seeing what happens.
And you mentioned 9 figures, like it's a lot of data. They're operating at such a high scale already, and you're going to be going into that. Describe a little bit more about, I guess you've done some diligence. Describe a little bit more about your thought process going in there and what you're enacting your strategy will kind of look like.
Yeah, I think that for me, and it is kind of interesting because full transparency, I actually had 2 offers in hand for fractional roles. And one of them was with a beauty brand or a skincare company. And then one of them was with Alpha Lion. And I was very honest with both of them throughout the process. And I'm a woman. I have a skincare routine that has gone tenfold. And it's something that I've done a lot of research on and have been very involved in. I've also been in the fitness industry. But Alpha Lion, you go to the site, it's very male focused right now. And as I said, there's the kind of branching off of Superhuman that's going to be a little bit more kind of dual gender and things of that nature. But honestly, what it came down to was the leadership. And when I just looked at the kind of leadership opportunities between the two, Jordan's just one, he's a high quality, high standing guy. And two, I knew that his philosophy on building a company was always very data driven. I believe that the e-com and brand is a mixture of art and science, but I also believe that at the end of the day, you've got to have some kind of data to back up the decisions that you're making. And I just knew that I was going into a situation where I was going to be working with somebody that I could work really well with, that we could be honest and transparent with, and be able to have the fun debates, but then walk away, feeling okay about it, and just kind of grow together. So that was honestly the biggest decision maker. But then also obviously the business itself, I'm pretty familiar with it, and I was able to get access to the data about how they've been doing historically. Growing really well, profitable. Just all of the good things. Amazon's kind of taking off pretty aggressively there. So knowing that they had a good business structure, a good leadership, and a good product, I was like, hell yeah, that's a pretty awesome opportunity. Oh, and they'll let me work from anywhere. So that's helpful.
Oh, nice. That's very cool. When are you going to Buenos Aires?
So we don't have an exact date. We're kind of been looking at flights, but the tentative plan is like between the beginning to end of October.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Good to know. One of the things that we talked about, and now you mentioned Come Thread Collective, Pilot House is also an agency. You've been on the agency side, now on the brand side, now on the fractional side. What's your stance when you're in these organizations on how to best engage with marketing agencies, say? And what trends are you seeing there?
I think that the relationship is definitely changing, or the perspective from the brand is changing. And I think that there was a time where brands were willing and ready to invest in whatever they could that had some form of a trackable ROI, whether that was real or just a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet. But they were willing to just continue to invest to grow. And then now everybody's become about profitability, and so things are kind of cutting back a lot. And I think that the biggest surprise for me, or I guess let me back up real quick. So when I went to the brand side, having been at agencies for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years before that, I was very conscientious of I did not want to be that client. I did not want to be the one who was just like, oh, the agency's terrible and like it's all their fault, and you jump on the call and you're finger pointing constantly and you're just throwing them under the bus and you're asking for way more than you're supposed to be paying for. And so I was very conscious of trying to always remember, the person on the other side is a human, what else they're working through, if the problems that we are experiencing were actually their fault versus maybe a structural thing, things of that nature. And the other thing, though, that I didn't appreciate until I got internal is how much the brand managers are managing. It's insane. And so I kind of went through what my overall role was. And so, when I was on the agency side, brand, my clients would always be late for calls, or they need to push this, or then they would forget to do this, or, whatever it was. And I was always like, what the hell are you doing? And where are you? And why is this not important to you? And then when I got on the other side of it, I was like, okay, I got a phone call from my CMO over here. My CFO is messaging me on Slack over there. I've got this contract I have to get finalized right now. I got to jump on call with this agency and approve a $200,000 budget. And my direct report is calling me about something else. And it's all happening all the time. And so you just have to kind of, I think that that's just kind of for agency owners or operators to understand that there's probably a lot more that's kind of going on behind the scenes. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is that the pricing is getting scrutinized in a much more rigorous manner than it ever has before. And the days of being able to charge just a blanket 10% of ad spend, I think, are gone, because I know 5 media buyers I could call right now that I could get for a hell of a lot less than that, because we know each other. 2, I know what buying is, and it doesn't take that long depending on the size of the brand, and you can typically do a decent amount of them.
100%. So in the way that you organize your departments, is there what are the ways that you find most that are best to engage with agencies? And what are pieces that you think brands should have in-house? Yeah.
So I am a firm believer that the ideal state is you have as much of the strategy in-house as possible and as much of the quote unquote button pushing external as possible. because I think that is where you as a business are going to have the biggest ROI, because you can get buyers depending on your budgets and things of that nature. But I'm talking just buying, no creative. You can typically get them for a pretty decent price. And so you may not need somebody in-house. Also, when you have somebody external, they're working the weekends as well. You don't have to worry about kind of those like HR things and all of that. But what I would also say, though, is that if you don't already have the strategy in-house, that's where I would then go to an agency and I would try to learn from them the strategy. And I would also recommend being pretty transparent about that as your goal. If you work with a good agency, typically they'll be really kind of respectful of that and say like, hey, we get it. Like, you're looking to bring this in-house in a year. Awesome. Let us come in. Let us teach you the strategy. Let us design a contract that works best for both of us. We then know that you might be out in a year, but also, hey, if this works out really, really well and you're making more bottom line, we're making our fees, then maybe this can continue for a longer period of time. But that's those relationships and kind of long-term agency strategy pieces, I think, can happen, but are a little bit harder. I think typically what's a little bit more common is that you'll bring in somebody from a strategy perspective, and then you'll end up kind of bringing somebody in-house.
Yeah, that makes sense. Back to Omni-Channel, you mentioned out of home. I just saw you recently did a post on TV. Is there anything of this from these other like top of funnel efforts from OluKai that you're going to be porting over to Alphalion that they don't currently do? Anything in your bag of tricks?
I think YouTube is one that I'm interested in exploring more. I think for Alphalion, it makes a lot of sense being in the fitness industry. And I think that YouTube's one that I used to scoff at and was like, no, I don't think there's any incrementality there. I don't really think there's anything there. The viewership on YouTube is really high. And the amount of people who are watching YouTube, especially with all the cord cutting and whatnot. I mean, my husband and I watch YouTube on the big screen all the time. And then YouTube TV is a whole other kind of venture beyond this. But I think YouTube in two different forms. One from a creator perspective. So there's obviously, Mr. Beast is the biggest one, but there's so many creators that have really quality content that people will watch weekly. And if you can kind of get with one of them that's in your target audience, I think creating some partnerships there makes a ton of sense. And then secondly is from the advertising perspective. And the power of YouTube that I really like is that because it's owned by Alphabet, you have both a demand generation and a demand capture under one roof. So you can really one-to-one measure how your demand generation efforts are leading to more search. There's some nuances here in terms of how you measure that. You can kind of do it with a segmented audience. I think actually somebody who was on the podcast recently was talking about this. I'm blanking on her name, but I remember she mentioned it. Or you can also do a brand or a search lift study in partnership with Google. And typically the last I talked, it was around 10K of a minimum. And that's a really great way to have kind of a controlled versus exposed group and actually see if you're lifting more awareness or getting more people to go and search for your brand.
Very cool. What's your position on, I've been doing podcasts recently with people on the Pilot House team, in the Amazon's team, and the Google team. People are getting more and more aware of when they're bidding on their own brand and when in all these automated tools, they're seeing great results, but then like looking in, digging under the hood and be like, oh, you're just really bidding aggressively on my brand. And so the scale isn't there. I'm curious, from someone that's managed, performance marketing and the brand side, how do you handle brand bidding across various platforms?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's one that you think, or I have thought people just know how to do. And then I've analyzed a couple businesses recently who were spending like 80% of their budget on brand. And I was baffled by it. So I think that the kind of one sentence, I think, goal of brand spend is you want to spend just enough to service the customers that are coming there. So I would equate it to if I owned a restaurant, for example. I want just enough servers in the restaurant to service the amount of people who are coming in. So if I've got 50 people there and 2 servers, then I did not do well. If I've got 2 people there though, and I've got 50 servers, I also didn't do well. And so you're always trying to like really balance those 2 things. And is there a 100% perfect formula? I'm not sure, but I do think that the tools that are coming out, I'm going to blank on the names, but there's a few tools out there that have come out where they'll basically suppress your brand spend if you're already going to show up number 1 organically. And I do think that those are very interesting. I had major spidey senses when we first explored them. And I was like, you're just, because the fee structure is basically a percentage of money that you saved. And I was like, but that's a number that you're making up. You're going to make up whatever number you want. But as I dug more into how they were doing it and actually saw the data behind it, I was convinced. And so I think that those tools could be really, really helpful. And there's some interesting plays there that you could do depending on how omni-channel your brand is and if you want to define other retailers as friendly. So if, for example, you don't care if people search on Amazon versus Google and Amazon bids on your terms all the time because you're selling really well on Amazon, you could say, hey, if Amazon's going to show up first, that's fine. We'll let them show up. We're going to save the money on it. Or if you're selling at, different wholesaler partners or whatnot, you can do the same there. So there's some kind of interesting strategies that you could explore depending on your business.
Are there any tools that you absolutely have to port over to AlphaBrain that you were using before that they're not currently using that you can think of right now?
Yeah, to AlphaLion.
AlphaLion, yeah.
Yes, I actually sent over a spreadsheet to Jordan and I was basically like, I want this information in this format and it will be beautiful and then I can know exactly what I'm doing. So it's really I like to be able to see in terms of like exact tools, I honestly, everything was kind of homegrown for me at OluKai. And so it was through, spreadsheets as well as Tableau. So it'll be kind of interesting as I start to dive into different kind of reporting tools that are more typical in the D2C space. But I'm always going to be a Google Sheets fan. And I like always having kind of a historical place where I can just see, hey, what was my revenue year or, what was my revenue on a monthly basis? What are my new orders, repeat rate? I want to be able to see AOV fluctuations. I want to be able to see then each individual channel performance as reported as their either on platform versus last touch. And having all of that in kind of one place to be able to always go back to and just kind of see the trends, I think is the number one thing that I wanted immediately. And then I think from there, starting to break down things like unit economics per funnel or product offering, or things like your LTV, your 3-month and 12-month LTV. I want to be looking at kind of where is the highest percentage of repeat purchases. When does the highest percentage of repeat purchases occur? So for some brands, that's going to be like 30 days. For some brands, that's going to be 60 days. For some brands, it's going to be a lot longer. But I've actually seen it almost exclusively across all the brands that I've looked at. It's typically a lot closer than you think it would be, even for brands that are, maybe in like tableware or footwear, for example. A lot of times that like 0 to 45, 60-day period ends up being really, really critical and has a high percentage of your customers coming through. So I think I forgot the question, but that's what I would want.
That's a great shout. No, I think you said it perfectly. Sarah, super nice to connect with you. I'm really glad to. I know you're still you're fielding opportunities and everything. And it's cool that you've got this one. That sounds so exciting. I look forward to kind of keeping in touch as you kind of lock in there. If you want people to follow you on your journey, where do you recommend they do that?
Yeah, so we'll Twitter, LinkedIn, Sarah Carusona, and I will definitely be kind of posting about my journey. And I'll be starting with AlphaLion in July, a little after 4th of July. So just going to take next couple of weeks to hang out, see some family, do some gardening, and then I will be full in it. So yeah, follow along there. And then I also just got onto Mentor Pass as well. So you'll be able to find me there too.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Sarah. This is great.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.